Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time to join us today. Another one of the IBDC workshop webinars. We've been trying to do these on a monthly basis, trying to pick up some of the issues that my experts are seeing in the industry and sharing them with you. IBDC, the Independent Broker-Dealer Consortium, is a grassroots organization comprised of members of the independent broker-dealer community, as well as registered investment advisor community. We have an opportunity to discuss amongst ourselves all the issues that our various businesses are facing and how we can work together cooperatively to find solutions for the issues that we see. We have a whole panel of experts to assist you. You have hotline capability with our experts. And today I'm going to introduce you to our insurance and cybersecurity experts. I've got a team from Willis, Towers, Watson with me today, and they're going to be talking about studying behavioral issues in cyber breaches, trade errors, and firm culture. I'd like to introduce you to Jack Jennings. Jack is an executive vice president with Willis, Towers, Watson. And he is a recognized expert in broker-dealer and investment advisory, risk management, and insurance. Jack is also an adjunct professor at St. John's University Greenberg School of Risk and Insurance, and he's got quite a following with his students. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Brian Kavanagh. Brian is the co-head of the broker-dealer and investment advisory practice at Willis, Towers, Watson. He was formerly with Aon's private equity and transaction solutions team in New York. Brian has more than 10 years experience with the financial institutions insurance space, and he's a graduate of Fordham University with a major in finance and New York Law School in the evening division. I went to, but just a couple of years before he did. Brian has got 3 kids, ages 16, 7, and 2. They may be in and out of the screen, so they'll be waving us on. Finally, but not lastly, I'd like to introduce you to Tom Finnan. Tom is with Finan. We had that discussion. Is Finan Tom? My apologies, my goodness. Tom is the cybersecurity growth leader at Wilson Towers Watson, where he specializes in cybersecurity insurance, cyber risk culture, and cyber risk consulting. He previously served as a senior cybersecurity strategist for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, a senior counsel on Capitol Hill, and an assistant general counsel at the FBI. Tom recently appeared as Yukon Cornelius in his local theater company's live production of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I'm sure all of you know that and know the songs that he probably sang for his audience. I'd like to turn the discussion over to Jack Jennings.
Thank you, Lillian. I'd like to get us started by providing some context for our subject, which is behavioral risk management, or looking at risks associated with broker-dealers and IAs from a behavioral perspective. If you look at the amount of time that not just we insurance brokers, Willis, Towers, Watson, but you guys, broker-dealers, investment advisory firms, where do you spend your risk management time and your money? And if I just break it down into 3 categories, risk control, like preventing losses or mitigating losses that occur. Secondly, risk finance, mainly buying insurance and settling claims under deductibles. And then third, dispute resolution, using our own skills and the skills of many attorneys, many of whom are part of this organization, to get to somewhat favorable outcomes of disputes. So if we look at those 3 things, we spend most of our time and our money on risk finance, on the insurance proposition. And I understand that. It's one of the biggest spend items in your business. But is that appropriate? Is that where we should spend our time? I think probably not. We should probably spend most of our time and money on risk control, preventing losses and mitigating losses that will occur despite our best efforts. And it's impossible to measure because we spend risk control dollars in hiring people, selection. We spend it in all these ways that it's hard to amalgamate it and look at it separately. But within that category of risk control, where should we spend our time? Should we spend it on auditors, internal audit? Should we spend it on systems that ensure control? And of course, we should do both of those things. But my proposition is that we should focus most of our risk control attention on behavior. I've long believed that virtually all risks are behavioral, largely at least, behavioral in nature. When I'm teaching at St. John's or speaking to other groups, I challenge my students or the members of the audience to give me a risk that is not behavioral in nature. And it gets everybody going, and the audience member, one will say, I've got one, earthquake. Nope, that's a fail. Earthquake is a behavioral risk. And they're like, we don't understand that. How could it be behavioral? Well, the earthquake itself is not, but the fact that we as human beings choose to live in California. And I understand why. It's the sun and the sand and the mountains. So our behavior plays into that, or the risk of flood. I think the number is about 60 or 70% of the US population east of the Mississippi River lives within 50 miles of a coast. So there are behavioral elements even to earthquakes and floods. And we at Willis Towers Watson have a great resource in Tom Finan, who studies and consults on behavioral risk, largely from the standpoint of cyber risk. But that behavioral perspective is transferable to broker-dealer and issues like trade errors and unsuitable investments and things like that. So that's the context. Risk control, where we should focus. Within risk control, let's look at the risks from a behavioral perspective. And with that, I am going to turn the presentation over to Tom Finan.
Well, thanks very much, Jack. And just as an overview, I'm going to address the cultural elements of cyber risk in a context that I think is all too familiar to all of us, specifically COVID-19. During the pandemic, remote work has become the reality for most of us. And for the non-technical folks listening in, and I'm assuming that's most everybody on the call today, it's also a great way to talk about cyber risk and make it resonate. So what exactly do I mean? Well, simply this. Cybersecurity is about more than encryption and firewalls. It's also about your employees, your people. So I'll be sharing some practical strategies that you can adopt to change cyber attitudes and behaviors for the better to boost the cyber resilience of your organizations. When America finally emerges from the COVID-19 pandemic, cybersecurity will never be the same. The reason, again, is people. While companies typically reserve work from home privileges for standout employees, they soon will find themselves in a world where being able to work from home is the expected employee norm. And cyber criminals are going to be adjusting their tactics accordingly. Hackers already are shifting their targets from relatively well-defended corporate environments to home offices and other offsite locations that lack strong protections. And the recent surge in phishing attacks aimed at quarantined remote workers is just one sign of this impending change. Without meaningful intervention on the human element of the risk, the coming remote work revolution really could make things a lot worse. So there are three trends that you can see on this slide that are emerging about how and where post-pandemic work is going to be happening. And each is really going to alter the cyber risk landscape dramatically. The first point is that a vastly larger population of remote workers will permanently expand the cyber attack surface. This is a phenomenon that's going to require new ways of prioritizing and mitigating cyber risk. Second, companies have to and will be turning to the human element of the problem and build more robust cyber risk cultures to ensure their resilience from a disaster. And finally, third, HR leaders, human resources, are going to be emerging as essential cybersecurity players and will be joining forces with their chief information security officer colleagues. Companies that fail to embrace this changing reality will face increasing exposure to cyber risk. Injured parties, counsel, and courts are going to start recognizing that human-caused cyber incidents are largely avoidable and in many cases negligent. Insurance underwriters will be similarly unsparing when assessing client suitability for cyber and other lines of insurance. So what is the bottom line? To protect themselves, companies should start now with building and funding the people-focused cyber risk management strategies that they're going to need in order to avoid major financial, legal, and reputational loss. Next slide, please. So before the pandemic, experts estimated that 3.6% of the American workforce was working from home at least 2 days a week. And that's defined as full-time for statistical purposes. And that figure represents about 5 million people. As the country comes out of COVID-19, those same experts estimate that the percentage is going to skyrocket by as much as 30% by the end of this year. That's a 733% increase. This shocking jump represents almost 42 million people, just under a third of the entire US workforce, who will be working from home full time all the time. And the massiveness of this sea change cannot be overstated. It took 15 years from 2005 to 2020 for the number of full-time work from home employees to expand from 3.5 million people to 5 million people. That's a growth rate of about 2.86% per year. By contrast, COVID-19 will explode the current number more than eightfold in a span of just 18 months. So in short, the pandemic is going to be accelerating what had been a gradual but growing shift toward remote work to really into a high stakes speed race. Next slide, please. According to Willis Towers Watson's latest cyber claims data, 63% of cyber incidents are caused by a company's employees through accidental disclosure, social engineering, ransomware, and sometimes, unfortunately, malicious intentional activity. The lack of direct physical oversight over remote employees really only compounds these problems. Without effective cyber risk controls to address the human element, companies really are at serious risk of crashing and burning as their work from home populations expand. And to avoid this fate, they must engage their remote teams and develop strategies that, again, change cyber attitudes and behaviors for the better. Their futures literally depend on it.
So Tom, hey, to bring it back to the RIA and broker-dealer space, whereas 63% of cyber incidents caused directly by employees, I think we can fairly assert that 100% of trade errors are caused by advisors and their employees, whether directly or indirectly. In fact, they actually have to be qualified for insurance coverage. So that's a very pertinent point, considering how bifurcated firm culture and remote work will affect the point that we're trying to make as far as trade errors and negligence issues later in the presentation.
Yeah, a great point. It all does come down to people and behavior, as Jack was mentioning, and I think the cyber world is waking up to that for sure. So on the next slide, I just wanted to point out that employee enthusiasm for remote work already had been very high prior to the pandemic. In 2019, a survey was undertaken, and 99% of employees said that they would like to work from home part-time remotely. Excuse me. They would like to work remotely at least part of the time for the remainder of their careers. And they cited as reasons, sort of avoiding commutes, greater work schedule flexibility, increased personal and family time, and better work-life balance. Among employees that were already working from home, about 80% reported reduced stress levels and increased overall health. Remote work also saved employees a lot of money, anywhere between $2,000 and $7,000 annually in areas such as commuting, clothing, food, and childcare. And on the flip side, employers were sort of warming to this idea of remote work. They welcomed the 13% increased productivity common among remote workers as compared to their in office counterparts. Employers also likely appreciated the improved morale, increased employee loyalty, and higher retention rates that work from home arrangements fostered. They also cited as a major benefit the considerable cost savings that resulted from the diminished need for physical office space. Next slide, please. The pandemic is really going to put these existing trends on steroids, and 5 factors that you see here are going to drive the rapid change that we're going to be seeing across the American economy. The first is that demand for work from home is going to increase among employees that, although they've been experiencing it in less than ideal circumstances, understand some of the potential benefits and what could be. Second, managers are going to be overcoming their prior fears about having employees working remotely, specifically about productivity and lack of collaboration. Having undergone the lockdowns themselves, they increasingly are going to be trusting those workers to provide them, and they'll be providing them with the virtual tools to do their jobs from home. Third, shareholders, they're not going to soon forget that the pandemic caused business interruptions, especially at the beginning of COVID. They're going to be pressing for companies to be continuing work from home arrangements in order to prepare for future disruptions. Fourth, employers will finally have overwhelming evidence of how inefficiently they've been using office space in the past, and they're undoubtedly going to be seeking to maximize cost savings through greater reliance from work from home. And then finally, many executives are going to be seeking further cost reductions by limiting business travel to only where the ROI makes sense. Increasingly, we're seeing this at our own company, but virtual meetings from home are really going to become more of the norm than they ever have been before. Next slide, please. And while the new work from home normal will drive numerous efficiencies and other business benefits, it unfortunately is going to be bringing a rash of new cybersecurity challenges. And when asked by a reporter why he robbed banks, the infamous 20th century gunslinger Willie Sutton responded purportedly, because that's where the money is. Today's really no different. Companies across every industry sector hold vast amounts of financial and personal data, as well as intellectual property, that are a modern day Willie Sutton's dream. Unlike old Willie, however, this century's cyber criminals don't menacingly brandish weapons and threaten violence to get what they want. Instead, their easiest way to get to a company's treasure is through its employees. In the last several months, hackers have been preying upon the public's palpable fear about COVID-19 in order to spread malware and launch other cyber threat campaigns. They've deployed an onslaught of emails that purport to advertise coronavirus protection and detection techniques, but which actually deploy ransomware when opened. And cyber criminals have ramped up their efforts in this regard, especially against folks that are working from home. They know that for many people, this is the first time in their careers they're doing that, often in less than secure environments, even less secure hardware, and with inadequate IT support. And they also know that work from home comes with a slew of family, household, and other distractions that contribute to higher email click rates and, by extension, higher rates of cyber infection. The hundreds of millions of newly remote workers that make up this expanded attack surface therefore represent a set of very tempting targets and easy routes into corporate systems. Next slide, please. Cybersecurity technologies undoubtedly will be coming online to help address this problem, and rightly so. You need security technology as part of a comprehensive cybersecurity program. The problem, however, is that technologies often fall short of addressing the human element of cyber risk. And this is really critical. To really get ahead of the problem, companies need to find ways to meaningfully engage their remote workers through more robust cyber risk cultures. It's really the only way to stop cyber criminal momentum in its tracks. And as Willis Towers Watson's insurance data shows, effective cyber risk prevention and mitigation is largely a people problem. And in response, companies need to assess and analyze the elements of their cultures that expose them to greater risk. And to that end, Willis Towers Watson researchers are well versed in all aspects of employee experience. Each year, they conduct employee engagement surveys of about 700 companies worldwide that involve about 7 million people. And after exhaustive study and analysis, they've identified 4 cultural indicators of higher than average cyber risk. The things that, if they're not optimized, are an indication that your organization is likely to be breached. The first is a lack of customer focus. Employees in breach companies report less emphasis on the customer, slower responsiveness to the customer, and fewer proactive efforts to obtain and act on customer feedback. The second is poor adaptability. Employees in breach companies report that their companies lack both speed and flexibility when it comes to decision making and managing teams. The third is low empowerment. Employees in breach companies report lower favorable scores when it comes to empowering staff through communications, respect, and support for teamwork. And fourth, inadequate training and compensation. Employees in breach companies report less adequate training for the work that they do, specifically less opportunity to upskill and to advance and role, and a need to better align pay with performance. And with the permanent work from home population expected to jump 733% by the end of this year, companies should start examining their existing human capital investments now to ensure that they're squarely addressing each one of these 4 challenge areas.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tom. I think that commentary is great. And to be honest, I don't have a whole lot of color to add other than what's included on the slide here. We accept these same 4 factors, lack of focus, adaptability, empowerment, and learning, which we'll talk about later, are preemptive measures that companies can take to prevent negligence and trade error issues at their firm. And we'll talk a little bit about why later in the presentation.
Great. And moving on to the next slide, really, in order to advance more robust cyber risk cultures, remote team managers first should adopt customer strategies that embed what I call empathy for all. And this is that first factor, this lack of customer focus. What empathy for all means is putting employees first through genuine and active caring for their well-being. So once employees feel cared for, they extend that care to clients as part of their day-to-day interactions. And as a starting point, managers should outline a vision that clarifies that remote workers are not just anonymous cogs in some machine, but instead are part of a collaborative team that's serving real people that are facing real problems. And to support that vision, managers really should be scheduling regular team calls. Those calls can be used to nurture awareness and discussion about the company itself, encouraging the sharing of personal and professional information, and recognizing team members for jobs well done. Managers likewise should be open to hosting virtual happy hours, lunches, and other get-togethers to promote team unity, trust, and collaboration. And at the same time, they should be maintaining open lines of communication with individual employees. By initiating check-in calls on a one-on-one basis, managers really can help foster much needed human-to-human interaction and connection while also ensuring that everybody's voice is heard. And by modeling these kinds of empathetic behaviors, managers really can serve as a proactive model for their teams and encourage similar treatment of their customers. Well, what does that mean? Well, for example, deep listening by a manager, maybe during one of those one-on-one meetings, could inspire a remote worker to set up a virtual coffee hour with his or her clients to focus on current challenges that client is facing. That interaction really could help lay the foundation for a lasting business relationship while boosting your organization's cybersecurity in the process. I think it's important to note that empathetic engagement doesn't just happen. To enable it, managers must ensure that their remote teams have access to shared technologies and teleconferencing tools that ensure seamless communications both tools, ensure seamless using those tools. Next, please. And step, more robust cyber risk cultures. Remote team managers should not with one size fits processes. Workers decide how they should structure, schedule, workers into the
You seem to be having some technical.
driver's seat when it
Oh.
comes to innovating approaches to meet. Oh, here we are. Great. And getting to that point of empowering employees, it does give them that opportunity, that flexibility to really strike a work-life balance, which is what even prior to COVID, workers were citing as one of the benefits of remote work. To promote further autonomy and adaptability, managers should empower remote workers to do the right thing on their own whenever possible. That means without having to require them to go through bureaucratic policies and procedures to get final approval for doing something. This freedom really makes workers heroes to their clients, transforming them from order takers to decision makers. And with more skin in the game, we find that they naturally work faster, longer, and better for client benefit. And as our data shows, it also has a cybersecurity impact. Employees who feel that they have this autonomy tend to be better stewards of cybersecurity for their organizations. And finally, communications in an adaptive work environment cannot be a top-down affair. The old practice of telling employees that they shouldn't bring a problem to you unless they also come with a solution is really out for the remote work population. Managers instead should be actively soliciting feedback from their remote work teams to identify emerging pain points early on, and then they should be then collaborating on solutions with those teams. In other words, managers really need to start going on the hunt for problems that they might otherwise see in a physical space with their workers all around them, and then be prepared to roll up their sleeves to help when issues are surfaced. Next slide, please. And then to further develop more robust cyber risk cultures, and this is on that empowerment issue, remote team managers should really be focusing on employee voice strategies. And that means regularly encouraging remote team members to proactively share their concerns, their ideas, and then their suggestions for improving the business. Managers can and must mine this information, especially for insight into customer moods, using it almost as a kind of smoke alarm to assess client sentiment and to course correct before business opportunities are lost. The science is really clear on this. Managers who actively encourage their workers to come forward with their views create happier teams, promote more collegiate environments, and boost productivity. And to get started, employee voice strategies also should include formal mechanisms through which remote workers can share. And managers should make it safe for them to do so by clearly explaining how received information is going to be shared up the reporting chain. Anonymized staff surveys, especially those that are conducted by outside third parties, are particularly effective for this purpose. To boost participation, managers should be collaborating with those parties on pre-survey communication strategies that explains why employee perspectives are being sought, who's being asked to contribute, and how those contributions are ultimately going to be informing changes for the better within the work environment. And surveys themselves can be distributed in multiple formats to employee cell phones, tablets, and other media to make it easy for them to participate. That's especially important given current COVID-19 conditions. I would note, though, that surveys are really only one part of the empowerment equation. Once remote workers have been enticed to provide their advice, managers have to take concrete action, or at least explain why they're not taking concrete action. So management outreach is not dismissed as tokenism. Workers rightly are going to want to know that their ideas and opinions are being actively considered to make the organization better, and that they're going to be included in future decision making. Otherwise, what's the point? And once leaders have decided how to proceed, managers then should consider using smaller pulse surveys to see how implementation progress is going. Does the workforce have ideas about how implementation could go better? So what does all this get you? Well, first and foremost, this repeated process of asking, receiving, and then acting on feedback does create this needed sense of employee empowerment. If employees understand that their viewpoints are being taken seriously and they see real changes happening, they're going to continue developing and refining and offering ideas to make the organization better. And this virtuous cycle of improvement can be strengthened with additional mechanisms that also are empowering employee voice. Mechanisms like mobile phone apps that facilitate chat functionality, group networking, feedback, and two-way dialogue between managers and the remote teams. Another good idea is setting up virtual forums where employees can meet regularly to discuss client needs, business operations, and then career track and other personnel matters. And another option to consider is what I call a targeted virtual jam. These are sort of impromptu, quick meetings on a very discrete issue that needs to be addressed, bringing your employees that are located remotely into that conversation really sort of gives them a sense that they're part of a process that's bigger for themselves and that they're having an influence on the future course of the business. Managers might also want to avail themselves of crowdsourced decision-making tools so they can submit questions and ideas to employees to get feedback. And a final mechanism is just plain old email, where you're soliciting opinions from employees and a form that employees can fill out that allows, again, that anonymized response. Is your organization already doing some of these kinds of things? If so, good for you. The point now is to understand the cybersecurity benefit from doing those things. At the end of the day, an engaged and a respected workforce is a more cyber secure workforce. And it's something that needs to carry through. And I'll get into the HR angle in just a moment.
Yeah, Tom, well taken. And I think we added this point at the end here, the open door policy, specifically to address exposures among advisors and reps about selling away. And we've been talking about trade errors, but we think a lot of the changing the behavioral mechanisms of the company has the same impact on behaviors like selling away as it would for negligence and trade errors, as far as mitigation of losses before they happen, before it even becomes an insurance issue. Insurance is such a small part of the equation in that respect. And as Jack was getting at with his introductory comments, we think firms would benefit from a lot of these, changing behaviors for the better within the company. For advisors and reps specifically, we think, an open door things like an open door policy, with the Office of Compliance. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? It's teaching a man to fish versus just giving him the fish. Real-time training for veteran advisors when the platforms change. Those things have meaningful impact on firms, but also the reps, as far as continuity in the relationship with you and your relationship with the rep. So we think this last point is of particular interest to our advisory clients, as far as adding value for the prevention of those issues that we talked about.
Absolutely. And when it comes to this human element of cyber risk and really the human element of any risk, I'm often reminded of the 1970s science fiction movie Soylent Green. I don't know if any of the audience are science fiction buffs, but it's the movie where Charlton Heston appears. And at one point in the movie, he's screaming to anyone who will listen to him, Soylent Green is people. Um, Actually, cybersecurity is people too, and risk management is people too. Back to Jack's point from the beginning. If you're not engaging people effectively and making them understand how they're valued and the impact that they can have on not only the overall good of their organizations, but their future jobs, being secure in an organization that can manage risk well, you're missing a huge opportunity to be a resilient organization. Next slide, please. In order to, again, to advance more robust cyber risk cultures, remote team managers also should be adopting training and compensation strategies that maximize, again, employee engagement. Employee training, otherwise known by people in the biz as upskilling, really is a win-win that helps managers mold their workers to better meet the needs of the business, changing customer requirements, as well as employees' specific career objectives. The science shows that upskilling really does drive retention, it enhances competitiveness, and it really makes companies more attractive to new hires, knowing that there's that kind of investment going on. And again, as the data shows, this engagement promotes better cybersecurity and cyber behaviors by employees. Before building a formal upskilling program, however, managers really do need a clear understanding of the foundational knowledge that they want all of their employees to have and over what time frames. And that understanding must be developed through regular conversation with offsite workers about their individual training requirements, the company's business goals and objectives, and how to make how to best align really both for the good of everybody. And also to make this formal curriculum training stick, managers should encourage the use of real life role playing simulations that enable employees to apply this knowledge immediately. It's one thing to learn something virtually, but practice makes perfect. I would add that less formal upskilling opportunities are equally, if not more important for remote workers in some cases. So-called micro training is particularly well suited given its accessible format in bite-sized videos that are shared, it can be shared virtually. Each module can be designed to meet narrow learning objectives that are relevant to the business. Managers providing micro training should periodically query their remote workers about what quick hit topics would be of most interest, help them do their jobs better, and then build programs around those interest areas. Moreover, by migrating chosen modules to cloud-based learning management systems, managers can get the added benefit of seeing which employees are doing what kinds of training, what time frame does it take for people to complete that training, the tests, any tests they might be taking, and then any certificates that they're earning based upon the education being provided. Other organic upskilling options include pairing remote team members with senior colleagues across the business through mentorships and similar job shadowing opportunities, leveraging star talent within your organization to create mission relevant training and making it available through video chats, recorded sessions, and webinars, encouraging the development of remote worker led education initiatives that facilitate cross pollination of in-house expertise. I see that happening, for example, in the different insurance lines at Willis Towers Watson, where we're doing videos on cyber insurance and the basics, and we're sharing it with the D&O team and vice versa. So that can be very helpful. And also creating internal and external learning communities where employees can freely engage, ask questions, and informally exchange information with their peers. And while the options are many, it's important to remember that remote workers, like everybody else, experience daily time pressures and limitations. So it's really up to their managers to help them make upskilling a priority. And they can do so by dedicating time, paid training time to enable employees to do this training, rewarding employees who upskill, and by approving seminar and workshop attendance during working hours. All the while knowing that these people investments directly translate into a better cybersecurity posture for your organization. Next slide, please. Now, when it comes to the related issue of pay for performance, work from home arrangements do present some unique challenges. As an initial matter, remote workers should not be penalized inadvertently for their status. And what that means is that the companies in the post-COVID-19 world should review their employee evaluation and promotion criteria to ensure that they don't favor in-office employees. For obvious reasons, traditional metrics like face time and hours worked don't really apply in the remote context. Managers, to address this, should then be focusing on outcomes focused evaluations that assess the quality and quantity of the work that's being performed and the deliverables being provided to clients. To make that shift, managers should collaborate with their teams to define what I call boundaries, which are clear sets of objectives, tasks, and deadlines for particular kinds of work, and then free employees to decide how they're going to best navigate within those boundaries. And over time, managers should test those boundary metrics by assigning similar projects to different people on their teams. And that way they can compare and contrast performance among similarly situated individuals to determine what constitutes excellent work, okay work, and perhaps not so great work. And that insight can then directly inform salary and promotion decisions. Experts warn, however, that managers should not base remote worker performance evaluations on outcomes alone. They should also be focusing on behaviors. A work from home team member might be extraordinarily productive, but they should not be breaking company rules and tearing down fellow colleagues that get in the way. So behavior focused performance measures could include a person's level of cooperation on the team, their level of supportiveness, conflict handling, mental stability, and other similar benchmarks. And given the physical distance that separates managers and their remote teams, experts are further recommending that feedback be obtained from a particular employee's teammates in order to get a truer sense of their performance. So managers should make it easy for their colleagues to provide feedback, perhaps by limiting questions to the kinds of actions that an employee should be starting, stopping, and continuing, just to sort of relate it to what the day-to-day performance looks like. Other experts suggest that managers should widen the circle uh, by gathering 360-degree feedback from leaders on other teams, departments, and other departments, and from other managers. People in that widened circle who have an opportunity to engage that remote worker really might have an interesting perspective on where their talents could best serve the organization. And that insight can provide managers with a more complete understanding of an individual's work performance that also can inform that evaluation and promotion process. As I mentioned previously, the side benefit of an effective pay for performance regime of this kind is a more robust cyber risk culture, one where more engaged employees consistently do the right cyber thing. So next slide, please. So what does all of this mean practically to organizations that now have, and for the foreseeable future will continue to have, a large percentage of their workers off-site? There's one major takeaway that I'd like to leave you with. The criticality of these four elements of employee experience: customer focus, adaptability, employee voice, and training and pay for performance, make clear that cybersecurity cannot remain the exclusive domain of CISOs and other technical professionals. People are not what CISOs do. Instead, HR leaders are the experts when it comes to workplace culture. They absolutely need to join the fight for your organization's cyber survival. And I'm going to be honest with you. When I am in front of an HR audience and I'm telling them that they're cybersecurity superheroes too, they sometimes run from the room so quickly they leave burn marks in the carpeting. In their minds, they've got other things to do, and the word cyber scares them. But they're missing the larger point. HR leaders do not need to become gurus in all things cyber. Instead, they need to view what they're already doing from a different perspective. And fortunately, they now have a growing financial incentive for them to do so. In 2018, Willis Towers Watson began partnering very closely with The Economist publication to take a deeper look at this topic of cyber resilience, to be able to respond and recover quickly from a cyber event. And the two companies basically developed a survey centered on this central theme. How are you as a company positioning yourself to best prepare for and respond to a significant cyber event? We talked to over 450 executives worldwide, and they responded resoundingly through increased cybersecurity funding across the board. Survey results show that about 73% of corporate boards plan to spend increased funding on cyber initiatives the next several years. Broken down, some 50% plan to spend up to 10% more on cyber, while another 23% plan to spend 11% or more. Why should HR leaders care about this? Because where that money is going, they're going to be major beneficiaries of this increased spending trend. Survey respondents indicated that their companies plan to allocate fully 50% of the increase in cyber funding just on the human element. 19% of that spend is going to be on hiring IT security professionals and helping them develop the cybersecurity skills and training that they need specific to their IT tasks. 16% of the increased spending is going to rewards and incentives programs to encourage all employees to do the right cyber thing, to practice good cyber hygiene as part of their day-to-day jobs. And 15% of the increase is going to be going to cybersecurity training for all employees, whether they're technical professionals or not. All of these functions fall squarely into HR's wheelhouse. Now, the survey further revealed that companies already are budgeting on average 1.7% of their annual revenue on cybersecurity. With the anticipated upward trajectory of cybersecurity spending, that means a lot of new funding is going to be headed in the risk culture direction. So to get ready, HR leaders really should be determining now how those incoming resources should be best allocated to address the four aspects of cyber-related employee experience that I just described to you that are most relevant to their companies. And for help, they really need to start to get to know their CISO colleagues. Together, I firmly believe that they can develop a common strategy to boost employee engagement across their organizations while ensuring more cyber resilient outcomes for their companies. Next slide, please. So in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, work from home arrangements are going to be an increasing phenomenon that will be a permanent phenomenon for a sizable portion of the working population. As cyber criminals shift their tactics to profit from this new reality, the need to better manage the human element of cybersecurity is going to come to the fore like never before. And companies are going to need to build more robust cyber risk cultures that focus especially on those 4 aspects of employee experience that correlate to higher cyber risk. Those that do so successfully will differentiate themselves from their peers, and that will make a difference to customers, to investors, to the plaintiff's bar. And as their reward, they're not only going to have a strong defense against future claims of cyber negligence, but also will likely qualify for cyber insurance on the most favorable terms possible. Something I'm seeing in my own practice today. We're getting more and more questions about how are organizations addressing the people piece of cybersecurity. Next slide, please. So I think it's fair to say that remote work is America's future, and managing the people piece of cyber risk must be too. That's all I have for you today. I appreciate your listening, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Tom. Brian, I know that you wanted to add a few pieces of information with respect to trade error and other risks that broker-dealers and advisors are facing that directly correlate with firm culture.
Yeah, and thanks, Lillian. I think we're almost pushing up on time, so I do want to invite my colleague Jack to join in the conversation. I'm going to try to shorten it a little bit based upon the time we have left, but I'm just going to dive right in here. And so the connection we're trying to make in this presentation is between firm culture and trade errors. Based on conversations with our partners, the equation goes something like: trade errors are the direct result of negligent employees whose negligence is caused or promoted by general attitude of indifference, which is perpetuated by a cultural element driven by firm leadership, right? So in some cases, we found that positive cultural change comes down to incentivizing employees to encourage the right type of behaviors, right? So that makes sense. That's exactly what we just talked about in Tom's presentation. And what we mean by that is immediate recognition tools that can include personal recognition for employees, spot awards, longer term incentives, and the use of these tools may drive down, to Jack's point at the beginning of the presentation, may drive down your long-term expenditures by minimizing the occurrence of negligence and trade errors altogether, right? So a couple of things to note on this point is that culture can be driven by the reps or advisors themselves, right? Also, firm culture can vary greatly from firm to firm or even within the firm itself. It doesn't necessarily start or end with firm leadership, but the tone from the top, as they say, is critical. The tone from firm leadership at the top affects all stakeholders, including customers, employees, suppliers, regulators, and the community itself, right? So that's super important as far as the messaging that leadership is telegraphing to the rank and file. All of our clients, I think it's fair to say 100% of our clients have fail-safes that prevent the occurrence of trade errors in the course of business, but they happen anyway. How come, right? Well, for starters, 2020 was one of the most volatile years on record. And Jack, you made this point yesterday. Well, if you have more volatility and holding constant the ratio of errors per trade, the pure expectancy of a trade error occurring will naturally go up, right? So what role does culture play in this? Well, think of the quintessential example of the disengaged rep or advisor. Poor performance, disorganized client records, trades usually taken over the phone, rarely recorded via email. This is an opportune environment for a trade to occur when volatility is skyrocketing. So it's all about laying the groundwork for a successful compliance-oriented firm. If you have reps within this that fall within this category, and I think maybe one or two, at almost every firm, it's an opportunity for a trader or negligence issue, intuitively, right? The 85% of CEOs and CFOs believe an unhealthy culture leads to unethical behavior. You know, it's the Harvard Business Review wrote in 2020, citing a 2017 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research. So, you know, what is culture? How do we think about culture? Well, you know, Merriam-Webster thinks about culture as a set of shared attitudes, values, or goals and practices that characterizes an institution or organization. You know, we don't think about trade errors necessarily falling into the realm of the unethical. It's more along the lines of a careless mistake. To be sure, every firm is prone to a careless one-off mistake. Mistakes happen, and that's why, frankly, why the insurance is there and exists, right? But the point we're trying to make here is to foster a culture of incentivizing the right type of behaviors. Consider the former example of the poorly performing employee. We only need to change their circumstances to that of a star performer, with holding all of the other same shortcomings constant, where instead of a hopeless disregard for company protocol, they exhibit a reckless disregard for company protocol, right? Consider the impact that even one of those behaviors has on their EAs, their peers, and firm leadership. And once these attitudes or behaviors become normalized or co-opted by other members of the same firm, we think the opportunity for issues like trade errors and negligence can increase exponentially, right? And we've seen a lot of normalization of these type of behaviors play out significantly in 2020 due to several factors. Three primarily, right? So cultural drift away from the shared attitudes and norms of 2019 due to the dislocation of the workforce and poorly adapted compliance frameworks, right? Who could have prepared for the epidemic that occurred in 2020? Two, the absence of direct employee supervision. And three, employee exceptionism, right? If we can use that word. We'll discuss a little more in the presentation on that. So to put all of these trends sort of into numbers, we saw a 62% increase in cost of corrections claims by frequency from 2019 to 2020, and a 37.5% increase in negligence claims from the same period. So to give you a sense of how those claims stack up, we saw a 21% overall increase in claim activity by frequency year over year, right? So comparing that 60% to the 20% and the 37.5% for negligence issues to the 20% overall increase in claims, there's a trend there, right? There's a trend. So as far as trade errors and negligence, you know, they're rising above the overall increase in claim activity. So to be sure, as we talked about before, cost of corrections is also driven in part by the tremendous volatility we saw in the market, but that doesn't necessarily account for the negligence issues that are occurring, right? So there's something to be said there as far as the value of firm culture and changing behaviors, as Tom and Jack had talked about. So taking it back to firm culture in 2020, companies have faced unprecedented cultural disruption in several ways, including evident political and socioeconomic disruption. Some of this change has been positive and some of the change has been negative, but all have affected our workplace environments in one way or another. And my guess is much of that disruption will in effect be permanent for these firms. You know, another comment on firm culture from an insurance standpoint is probably the most important intangible that underwriters use to price your policies. You know, to be sure, the underlying fundamentals have to be there, including shifts in AUM, firm performance against the S&P or applicable benchmark, investment quality and audit opinions, et cetera. However, the thing that can often tip the balance are the cultural elements of a risk, right? And these are often communicated in several ways, through face-to-face interactions with the underwriters, but also through things like transparency in the submission process, claims process in particular, communications with the underwriters, things of that nature. So if a risk is completely clean fundamentals and the underwriter views the firm culture poorly, they may reject the risk out of hand. Alternatively, for firms that have had issues in the past, strong cultures, it may benefit them greatly to have these face-to-face interactions with their underwriters. And it can also help from a narrative standpoint regarding past issues to sort of tell the story of what happened, provide context around it, but also to help offer insight into the prevailing mindset of the firm executives, right? To humanize the element of the risk. So there are a couple of key points that I want to make on insurance product pricing. We are insurance people, so I do want to make a few points about insurance, about the impact of culture on your program prices, right? So insurance products, number one, insurance products are not a panacea, right? They're not the be all end all of risk management, as Tom had talked about. It's the underlying point of our entire presentation, right? There are a host of issues that aren't covered by insurance. fines and penalties, for example, right? Notwithstanding certain court decisions out of the Seventh Circuit and the Southern District of New York, right, as we've seen. Premium control, right, is the second point I want to make. The ability to control premiums is perhaps most controlled by not having losses in the first place. Conservative behaviors are the most controllable cost management technique for insurance. Behavioral thinking is 100% rooted in cultural frameworks, right? And the third point I want to make is low levels of engagement will lead to higher costs over time. That's inevitable, right? And then we talked about the example of the poorly performing employee, right? Rife for the occurrence of a negligence or trade error claim, right? So within the low levels of engagement, there are a few other points I want to make. We talked about before eliminating star performer exceptionism. That's a must. Standardizing compliance procedures and protocols across the organization for all employees. You have to make sure you're treating everyone equally, right? And not making exceptions as far as trade procedures for one rep versus another. Positive reinforcement is a must. We talked about creating incentive programs for star performers, and not necessarily star performers in a financial sense, although that's very important, but star performers in a compliance sense, telling positive compliance stories, highlighting this individual inside and outside the firm, amongst the community. That's super important. You want to empower these people. You want to make them feel valued if they're compliance stars, right? And that'll lead them to being role models for other people in the firm. Good people beget good people, right? So that's a key message, that we want to convey. And setting HR and compliance up for success is the last point I want to make. That's just a pure dollars game. You want to make sure if they're asking, for funding for a, headcount or, a specific software program that would help them do their job, you want to make sure you're empowering them to make the decision to execute on that, appropriately. And you want to make sure you do it before you have scale where it gets to a point they can't manage their normal day-to-day workload anymore. And all of a sudden they're overburdened. They can't handle things like a regulatory audit, and then it's sort of the day-to-day gets lost in the mix. And then there's even more regulatory issues that stem from that, right? And so we've often seen those issues creep up in firms, in the 2.5 to 7.5 billion band regulatory assets band, where all of a sudden they're taking on all this new money and they don't have capacity to handle the traditional compliance issues that they were handling before, right? And that comes down to investment in the Office of the General Counsel, investment in the Office of the CCO and the COO, as far as allocating resources to these essential people, right? And so, in closing, I just want to make a quick comment. Good firm culture, we think it starts with hiring the right people, training them, making them effective in their roles, empowering them to make the right decisions, and giving them the resources they need. As we talked about before, good people beget good people. And if you see an organization with good people, you want to be part of that, right? If you're a good person. So good people do the right thing. They promote good behaviors. And are the issues of culture and trade errors related? We think yes, absolutely, both directly and consequently. And thank you very much. That's all I had to add.
Thank you very much, Brian. When we were talking earlier about this presentation, I really love how we're focusing on the people element and the people aspect. We've had so many cybersecurity webinars and presentations, and they tend to focus on the external aspects of cybersecurity and what corporations need to do from the external risk. And I just really appreciate how you have focused on the people within the organization and how you can empower them to identify these risks and to also help mitigate these risks. So the other thing that we were talking about as we were preparing for this is how insurance carriers are also contributing to modifying the behavior and encouraging good behavior, firm behavior within broker-dealers and advisory businesses. When we see claims coming up repeatedly, an underwriter's instinct is to just add on that exclusion. What I say, today's claim is tomorrow's exclusion. Well, we can't continue to do this because we're going to exclude just about every risk that broker-dealers and advisors are facing day to day. So what we are doing as underwriters is we are getting creative about how to underwrite our policies to encourage good behavior, to encourage the additional compliance steps. And let me give you a couple of examples. Alternative product claims tend to be frequent and severe. Two worst words that an underwriter wants to hear. So how do we work with the broker-dealers that earn a significant amount of their revenue in the sales and servicing of alternative products? Well, we try to encourage them to look within the product classes and to put limitations on the sales of the products and concentration. So many of the policies that are offered to broker dealers and advisors these days may have provisions in the policy that will limit the amount of alternative products that are sold to an individual and sold as a whole to all of the investors of that broker dealer or the advisor. There might even be limitations as to whether or not certain alternative products should be sold to individuals over a certain age. So now we're encouraging the broker dealers and the advisors to actually look to see how they're doing business and where they can mitigate their own risk and to encourage good firm behavior. Another area that we see quite frequently, and it's not a surprise, but when broker dealers are recruiting and they're bringing on registered reps and advisors who have a history of claims, the chances are those individuals are going to have more claims. Claims tend to follow people who have had claims. So a lot of the underwriters may include an endorsement to the policy that says that no claims will be paid in the event that a certain individual, registered rep or advisor has had 3 or more claims within a 5-year period. It's significant. So these are ways that we in the insurance industry are also trying to influence firm behavior. And with that, we see a reduction of claims and we see an opportunity to work together. Again, underwriters don't want to deny insurance for a firm that is seeking insurance, but they need to limit their own exposure, and with that, the exposure of the broker dealers and the advisors. So do we have any questions from the audience before we see?
Lillian, may I offer some comments that I think will encapsulate what we've been speaking about? I think the first comment is that modern theory about enterprise risk management says that we should look at the upside, not only the downside, when we consider risk. And I think most of our discussion has been on the expense side of the income statement, how to avoid this expense or, more exclusions, therefore less coverage, higher expense. But this is also an exercise in preserving and enhancing one's reputation. So there is an upside to this, keeping a clean house with the human element functioning as best as we humans can has a significant upside. So we're not just doom and gloom on the downside, particularly in financial services. Secondly, the term's been used a few times in this discussion, tone at the top. And I think that's a term that catches so many specific things that we mentioned today. And the firms that are represented on this call, the ones that I've worked with do very well in that regard because I've sit through underwriting meetings where underwriters will ask the compliance people or the CEO questions, and the underwriters are half concerned with the answer to the question, but the other half, they're concerned with the warm, fuzzy feeling or not that they get from the firm. So that's, they're trying to get at the culture, and almost all of the firms I've worked with, they pass that. You're doing these things. Can you get better at it? Can you add to it? I'm sure you do, and that's why you're on this call. Which leads to the final comment that I have. All the things that were offered today, what do we do? What do we, as broker dealers, investment advisors, what do we do? Well, that's something that you have to, choose a few issues or a single issue, whatever it is, but choose something and have it on your agenda. Maybe at your firm, compliance plays the heavy. And if that's the case, who is the open door? Where is the open door? Is it someone else in compliance, a good cop, bad cop? Or is it the CEO? Or, someone else in the firm? So, or is it, hire selection, attracting new advisors to the firm, or surveying employees to dig a little bit deeper on some of the things that we offered today. So, choose one or more of these things and make them actionable, and it will not move you in the wrong direction. It will move you in the right direction. But this is the way these so-called soft issues work. Unless people at the top adopt them and move some things forward, nothing happens. So it's on you to move it forward.
Thank you for that. Well, if we have no other questions, then we can end this wonderful presentation. I will be sending out a copy of the presentation to everybody, and the recording will also be available on my website, www.ibdcconsulting.com. Again, Willis Tower Watson's is an IBDC Alliance member. They're available if you are a member for their wonderful advice with respect to risk management, cybersecurity, various insurance programs, as are all of our other IBDC Alliance members. So thank you very much, and we hope that you have a lovely day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.